Todo was then pushed into a rather big room, one of the waiting rooms in Shibuya filled to the brim with chairs, escalators, and elevators, as Todo blinked before patting himself as he noticed in that moment that 2 of Sukuna's fingers were stolen. Realizing that this was Mahito's plan, as he was about to move in order to help Yuji out, the transfigured human entered into the room. Now that Todo could see it properly, he could see it tens of eyeballs all across its body as well as several hands. A total of 8 were present on the human, this model named as Chimera Beast, as it snarled at Todo while staring him down. Todo would have then lifted up his hands as he began to think. While he was thinking, it was almost like time itself was moving slow. In his seduction, he was able to realize quite fast that this was made to counter his curse technique, due to its several eyes and arms. Thanks to that, disorienting this type of creature was going to be near impossible due to the fact it could look anywhere and everywhere all at once. Furthermore, thanks to its several limbs, it would be able to counter any move or anywhere Todo could appear because it could attack everywhere. And to make it even more annoying, Todo was fighting alone. His curse technique, while good on its own, was certainly much better when he had several people fighting alongside him. But he knew that he would make this work. Right now, his brother was putting his very life on the line in order to beat a special grade curse, a disaster curse like Mahito, who was a massive threat to all of humanity. He was going to beat this beast so he could join his brother in taking on Mahito, then together they would stand a much better chance. And while he was thinking, he did notice a very critical flaw within the beast, which made him smile a bit. He knew what his plan was, and he knew how to beat it. Even in the face of his natural predator, Todo would find a way to win. The Chimera Beast then released a loud roar as 2 of the massive arms were sent flying towards Todo, both of them attempting to land a punch on him. All the while, the eyes of the transfigured human were looking in every direction, making sure they could detect the very moment that Todo decided to clap and swap places. However, Todo wasn't nervous. No, he was smiling, as a massive amount of curse energy flared around his body, as he then said, "Natural for a curse to only think about one aspect of combat. It's not the technique that makes the sorcerer, but the sorcerer who makes the technique." As the Chimera Beast's attack rushed towards him, aiming to slam one of its massive fists into him. And while the beast was expecting Todo to swap, he surprised it by choosing not to, instead clashing fists right off the bat with it, as his eyes locked with several of the Chimera Beast's eyes. And the 2 were clashing at a surprisingly rather even level of power, which was definitely impressive for the Chimera Beast in Todo's eyes, but also it showed the Chimera Beast that Todo was actually stronger than he had expected. This was because the Chimera Beast was built to counter a stronger Todo than the one in Goodwill, and that was his expectations, but Todo had managed to grow even stronger than what they could expect. As Todo then hopped back, moving his fist away from the clash, but the Chimera Beast attempted to slam 2 more of its fists down on Todo in an attempt to crush him. However, this was when Todo picked up one of the chairs while he kept his eyes on the Chimera Beast. As Todo jumped high up, avoiding the strike from the hands, before he then punched the chair, breaking it completely and sending the remains of the chair all over the place. As the Chimera Beast's eyes began to look in several directions, following each of the shards of the chair and where they were, processing them and noting them down in its head. And in a few moments, Todo was able to figure out that this thing operated more like a computer than an actual human, which was something that would be rather useful for him to know. After all, that meant it likely didn't have the same adaptability that humans would have, making it a bit more easier to predict its patterns. One of its programs were to look at objects that had curse energy and register them, in preparation for if Todo attempted to swap with them, and be prepared for any of that. After all, that seemed to be a very common tactic for Todo. However, in spite of that, Todo didn't actually swap with any of the objects that he had just scattered all over the place. So it just registered it in the back of its head as something to be wary of, however they weren't too concerned about it. However, while clapping would have been a perfect way to escape this clap attack, Todo didn't swap, as he kicked both of the hands away before landing on one of them and beginning to run up the Chimera Beast's arm. As it then attempted to counter Todo by pushing him off the arm, sending one of its arms flying at Todo in order to smack it off. However, Todo elegantly jumped right over it, landing on the ceiling before using the ceiling to launch himself down. This time when he landed on the ground, he picked up 2 chairs, as he threw one of the chairs at the Chimera Beast, while at the same time he broke the other chair, scattering even more pieces of that chair everywhere. The Chimera Beast would have blinked, as it then smacked away the chair, deflecting the chair into one of the walls. However, this was immediately followed up by Todo throwing another chair at the Chimera Beast, and another. Todo was now starting to rapid-fire chairs with one hand to throw them at the Chimera Beast with one hand. The other hand was breaking more chairs and scattering all the pieces of the chair around the area. The Chimera was beginning to process every single one of the chair shards that were thrown, and while the chairs weren't doing any damage to the Chimera, it was starting to annoy it. After all, it had no idea what Todo was planning or why Todo was throwing around all these chairs. Sure, it might have made sense if Todo was going to swap around with them, but it didn't. Todo didn't swap around with any of them, so he was starting to get annoyed that he couldn't figure out. So instead, it decided to do a gamble, and sending all 6 of its hands right towards Todo at the same time, attempting to land all 6 of his hands and trying to destroy him in one hit, or at least do a critical amount of damage in one hit. However, Todo met the charge head-on, and this confused the Chimera Beast. After all, if these hands ended up hitting Todo, it would have caused lethal damage. Was Todo about to swap at the last second with one of the chair pieces around? That would make sense. So its eyes began to look around, darting all across the place in preparation to move its arms in order to hit that location. However, while Todo did clap, he didn't actually swap. No. But what ended up swapping was the Chimera Beast with one of the chair pieces, as now his Chimera Beast was standing beside Todo rather than going for him directly. While Todo did not have a domain expansion, he had effectively made this area into his domain expansion, as he focused cursed energy towards his foot and then kicked the Chimera Beast in the head. This caused the Chimera Beast to groan out in pain as it turned around, attempting to slam its fist into Todo once more, but Todo ended up swapping his places, making it so the Chimera Beast was now behind Todo instead of in front of him. After that, Todo focused a large amount of cursed energy towards his fist and punched it in the back. The Chimera Beast then realized what Todo's strategy was. He himself wasn't going to swap places. No, what Todo was going to do was force the Chimera Beast to swap places with the ground so he would alter his positions so Todo could repeatedly land hits on him. As Todo then hopped back while making a motion towards kicking the air. However, a moment before the fit would have landed, he ended up clapping once more, swapping the Chimera Beast with one of the chair pieces, this time swapping him into a hit. Todo was a true genius of jiu-jitsu, someone who was able to turn an advantage, a foe who was meant to be the perfect counter to him, into an advantageous situation for himself. And now it was just a battle of attrition. He just needed to stack up enough damage on the Chimera Beast in order to permanently put him down, as he landed blow after blow, until suddenly he felt a massive shockwave come, as Mahito and Yuji had now clashed Black Flashes in a different room, sending shockwaves all throughout the subway. However, this ended up making the Chimera Beast begin to evolve. It was shapeshifting, starting to grow more durable armor around its body, changing more and more of its abilities and updating its tactics. However, Todo, seeing that Yuji landed a Black Flash, ended up putting him in the zone. He didn't want his brother to leave him even more behind than he already did. He felt a need, a desire to catch up to him, and that was part of what motivated Todo to become so strong. He did not want his brother to become alone, so he ended up tricking the Chimera Beast one more time, and landing a Black Flash kick right on the Chimera Beast's face, sending it flying through a wall. Todo knew that this battle was not done, as he had his cursed energy raised in preparation. He could feel the control of the Black Flash, that familiar feeling of it, all flow throughout his body, that strength, and he was preparing to face off against the Chimera Beast once it rose again. However, a few seconds passed where it didn't end up rising, but instead, two hands rose out from underneath Todo and grabbed him by the leg, dragging him down to the next floor and getting rid of all the chair pieces, or at least scattering them even further throughout the new room that they were in, a waiting station for the trains to arrive. As Todo looked up and saw 6 massive red fists flying towards him, preparing to slam down on him and try and finish him off, but Todo was able to clap and swap places with one of the chair pieces and get out the way. As Todo looked over to see all of the Chimera Beast's eyes glowing red with a hatred and anger towards Todo, it wanted Todo dead. As cursed energy was blazing off of its body from anger, it did have a sorcerer within its own composition similar to the Chimera Beast that Nobara had fought against. While it was a lot more machine-like in terms of its tactics, it still had the human mind and ability to get angry. However, it didn't really have the ability to adapt, at least from what Todo could tell. But Todo was also able to tell now its tactics were updated. Now it was going to be even harder than it was before. And the two opponents began to rush at each other once more. Todo was making sure to note down where all the chair pieces were in preparation for swapping. While this would be a bit harder now the chair pieces were more scattered for his tactic to work, it was still possible. However, suddenly the Chimera Beast's hands were sliced off, and this wasn't because of Todo, as the Chimera Beast began to groan in pain before looking to see 2 glowing red eyes in the shadow beginning to approach him, and those 2 glowing red eyes slowly revealed themselves as Choso. As Choso then said, "Any brother of my brother is also my brother." Todo smiled a bit. He was happy to see that Choso had arrived. This would mean they would be able to deal with the Chimera Beast quickly and be able to back up Yuji just as fast, as Todo took advantage of the fact that it was caught off guard while rushing towards it and slamming his foot right into the Chimera Beast's chest, launching him back even further. As the Chimera Beast quickly reattached its fallen off hands towards its body, and the arms went back to it as it was knocked back. It was staring at its 2 opponents, beginning to analyze and figuring out a new way to fight against them. It was not prepared to fight against someone like Choso. After all, it was made to counter and battle against Todo, but it did also know that Choso wasn't that physically strong, so if you get into close quarters combat with Choso, it wouldn't be that hard to deal with them, and then they could finish off Todo. Though also finishing off Todo would likely be the better move in this case because of how useful Todo's curse technique is when it comes to being paired with other people. As Choso then created a large amount of blood that he scattered all over the place. Thanks to having fought against Jogo with the likes of Yuji as well as Mimiko and Naniko and Todo on their side, they were able to figure out how to fight well alongside each other and now were much more adjusted. This was also going to give Choso attacks all around the area that he would be able to use, as both Choso and Todo focused, preparing to battle off against the Chimera Beast. As the Chimera Beast sent two of its arms towards the ceiling, breaking off two parts of the ceiling and throwing them immediately at Choso and Todo, as Todo clapped twice, swapping both his and Choso's places with some of the blood that Choso had already made, firing out a piercing blood aimed for the Chimera Beast's shoulder. Thanks to the Chimera Beast's vision, it was able to see the piercing blood coming, as it was just narrowly able to move out of the way of the piercing blood. However, a moment before it did attempt to move out the way, Todo clapped and swapped its places, swapping it with one of the blood that was near the Chimera Beast, making it force to let its other shoulder get hit by the piercing blood. As the Chimera Beast glared at Todo before sending four of its arms right at him, and Todo swapping places with Choso this time, who Choso used the Fred form of Slicing Exorcism to cut off the arms immediately. As Todo then rushed forward, taking advantage of the fact that it was now in pain, and landing a punch straight on the Chimera Beast's chin, sending it rocketing forward as Todo then clapped, swapping Choso's places again with the blood, as Choso focused blood towards his hands, activating flowing red scale stack as well as blood armor in order to land a hard punch on its cheek. And despite Mahito making the Chimera Beast to not get disoriented, it was getting disoriented. It was getting overwhelmed by Todo with the help of Choso. And as the Chimera Beast was sent rocketing backwards, suddenly 3 blood orbs rose up around it that began to compress heavily before exploding. Choso had just used the Supernova attack. As the Supernova had ended up causing some holes to form on its body. Not too big, but it was still holes nonetheless, as it was trying to focus on regenerating, as both Todo and Choso took advantage of this chance, both of them rushing towards it and not giving it a chance to recover, as Todo focused curse energy towards his fist, preparing to use the Black Flash. However, suddenly all 3 of them were able to hear a heartbeat from Choso. As while this technique wasn't anywhere near as good as Yuji's flowing red scale burst, it was clearly inspired by it, as Todo smiled a bit. He was able to see that Yuji had given Choso some inspiration for an ability. While Choso's heartbeat wasn't beating anywhere near as fast as Yuji did with flowing red scale burst, it was still beating pretty fast, as Choso decided to call this move flowing red scale Nova. As the two of them synced up perfectly with each other, Todo landing a Black Flash while Choso landed his own punch, resulting in the Chimera Beast being torn apart completely. And just to make sure that it didn't regenerate, blood exploded all around the Chimera Beast, tearing it completely apart, destroying its body, as Choso and Todo had finished it off, and Choso's blood all flew back towards his body. As Todo then thanked Choso for coming, though we did have to admit he was a bit surprised. After all, he knew that he was dropping Mimiko and Naniko back, so he questioned if they were with him as well, and Choso told him no, he already finished dropping them off. However, during their time there, they did briefly end up meeting with another sorcerer, one with blonde hair who was rather tall, who Todo immediately recognized who they were talking about, which made him smile a bit, as Todo then told him that was his teacher, Yuki Tsukumo, and that was someone that they could most certainly trust. He also then went on to thank Choso for coming in order to back him up. He actually wasn't too sure that he would be able to beat the Chimera Beast on its own, especially after it went through that evolution and figured out how to counter his ability. But he also mentioned that the two of them did not have time to rest. They needed to make their way over to Mahito right now in order to back Yuji up against him. While they were pretty certain about Yuji's power, and the two of them had just gotten stronger themselves, they weren't too sure if Yuji was capable of beating Mahito on his own, especially with what Choso had told them that Mahito had been getting stronger. Choso did nod in agreement to that, and the two of them began to go up the subway in order to head back to where Mahito and Yuji were fighting. On their way there, they ended up encountering Nobara, who joined with the group as well. Nobara was kinda in a hurry right now and ran as fast as possible to reach them, causing her to lose her breath a little bit and Choso to carry her on his back, giving Nobara some time to recover their stamina properly. However, that was when all 3 of them felt an evil wave of curse energy wash over them, and a massive amount of fear rose into them as Todo remembered something. 2 of Sukuna's fingers were stolen. And upon sensing that curse energy, he realized exactly what was happening, as he told Choso to stop and the 3 of them were going to wait over here for now. This confused them before they realized exactly why. They would be detriments against Sukuna than they would be help. Especially if any of them died. The self-blame that Yuji would go through would be a potential avenue for Sukuna to have his body permanently, and if Sukuna got control over Yuji's body, especially right now while Gojo was sealed, it would be game over for everybody. And all 3 of them hated that they had to stay here for now, but it was the best option. It was the best way to guarantee that they wouldn't die. Fortunately, Sukuna wasn't really one to hide his curse energy, so it would be pretty easy to notice when Yuji got back control forcefully. Meanwhile, on the surface, Nanami was fighting against transfigured humans. They weren't that difficult to deal with, but he was able to do it, and he was saving multiple people right now. And while he did sense that wave of curse energy and was a bit concerned by it, he knew it would be better to not get too concerned and just be focused on the job. After all, he was an ant. Why would Sukuna even care about him? Inumaki was also helping him as well, using his curse technique to evacuate people into the subway station, as that would be a safe place for them to hide, considering the fact that Manito was no longer present inside of there. While neither of them would be fully able to help against them, the best they could do right now is evacuating people. Meanwhile, Panda and Kusakabe were battling against members of Geto's family. This battle had been going relatively uninterrupted, and Kusakabe had been holding back in order to stall for time, though he was also able to sense the battle between the two behemoths going on, and he quickly decided, yeah, this is enough, I need to get out of here. However, suddenly all three groups noticed something in the sky. Several, tens of blood stars beginning to form, and in the center of that was a boy with pink hair with blood wings that almost looked like an angel, and at first they were confused, but Nanami was the first to realize what was about to happen, as Kusakabe also activated Simple Domain in preparation for this, while he looked up to the several blood stars that began to rain down, several blood arrows that were aiming for each civilian on the surface. Inumaki was just barely able to narrowly escape this by going inside of the subway. He just barely managed to avoid one that was aimed for his head. The other members of Geto's family that were on the surface were skewered through by the arrows. Kusakabe, through using the properties of Simple Domain, was just narrowly able to deflect it. It took everything that he had, but he was able to deflect the blood arrow. Panda also ended up getting pierced by several of the blood arrows as well. And then finally there was Nanami Kento, who pushed a civilian out of the way into one of the subways in order to shield their life. As Nanami was preparing to die, he was happy now, happy he could live a life, a satisfied life. As memories came back to him of all the people that he had saved, the people that he had helped today that were all so thankful for him, even the bread maker that he had met a while ago, how he had lived a rather normal life and tried to live both sides, but he ultimately came back to being a jujutsu sorcerer. His goal was ultimately to eventually one day retire in Malaysia and just live a normal life, but that wasn't going to be an option. This was where he died. Or at least that was where he thought he was going to die, as he was also pushed into the subway just in time, and someone else had taken the blow. A one-armed old man who was bleeding out. No, not just a normal one-armed old man. It was Naobito. Naobito had decided at the last moment to not go back to Shoko, and instead go to help Nanami the second he saw what was about to happen, moving at full speed and casting a binding vow just on time to never be able to use his curse technique again. As he had managed to save a couple more people by doing this through his binding vow, but he ended up perishing from this attack. Naobito still thought Nanami had a lot left to do. After all, while Nanami was middle-aged, he still had people he could guide, he still had people he could help. Naobito, on the other hand, through being the leader of the Zenin clan, had caused enough pain through his life, and at the same time he had lived more than long enough to say that he could die satisfied with the life that he lived. As a smile slowly crept its way onto Naobito, while there were several arrows inside of his body, and the life slowly drained from his eyes. As he closed his eyes, now dead and dropping to the ground.